What up, Wizards? It's Dev. SBMTG, we like it in Magic, and rejoice, because it's the last Alchemy video for a while. It's also the chicken's birthday, so if you want to get down there and wish Waverly a happy birthday in the comment section, you can do that. You've had a good birthday so far, baby. She had a little birthday cupcake. But you are a little birthday cupcake. But anyway, last Alchemy video for just a minute. Now, whenever they rebalance cards, or if there's an especially cool Alchemy deck that I want to cover, maybe we'll come back to this format from time to time. But we're going to go back home to Standard for a minute after this video. But in the meantime, been having fun playing around in Alchemy every now and again. Sorry, but it's fun to play with new cards from time to time. It's a near universal experience. So today, let's talk about the top 10 cards that I've been having the most fun with personally, messing around in the Alchemy format. And note that I didn't say, like, the top 10 most powerful cards in Alchemy, waving my arms around like a YouTuber. No, very specifically, these are the 10 cards I've been having the most fun with, because I feel like already at this early date, right, we're already 3 days into the format, there's a bunch of cards that people have already talked to death, right? Like, if I don't mention Inquisitor Captain, which I like to call Fudge Pop, because it's a Cocoa on a stick. You see what I did? Do you get it? Anyway, if I don't bring this card up, people are going to be like, what about Inquisitor Captain? And exactly that voice and inflection. So here, I brought it up. But every time the card gets played against me, it's a little underwhelming, to be honest. They get a Hill Giant, and then maybe something decent, but not always. So I just... Cards just kind of been meh, but I'm sure it's decent in a lot of situations. I just haven't seen many of them yet. But aside from that, I guess there's these like two cards that both have Geist in the name. They are red and blue respectively. And the red one has prowess. It goes and like draws an instant or sorcery when it ETBs. That's pretty good. And then the blue one has been seen playing these Epiphany decks and whatnot, because it basically makes your Epiphanies cost 5 mana, and that's stupid. So you've probably seen and heard of these cards a lot already, even if I'm the only person you come to for Magic content, if you've been playing Alchemy, you've seen these cards too often, so they're off the list. I've mentioned them already. There you go. But let's talk about 10 cards that I personally really, really like in Alchemy. And some of them maybe you haven't tried or heard of, and some of them you probably have, but either way, I've already mentioned what would normally be the top 3 on anybody else's list, so let's just get those out of the way. And that way we can talk about stuff like Tenacious Pup, which is my honorable mention for the video. Look, I haven't played this card yet. I haven't actually played with this card yet. But very often, somebody will play it on turn 1, and I'm like, oh, Tenacious Pup, whatever. It's not a big deal. And then next turn they play a Werewolf Pack Leader, and it's a 4/4 Trample Vigilance for the rest of the game. It's like, very sick. Like, when I first read this, for some reason, my mind just auto-completed that it only worked with wolves. But it works with creature. It just works with any creature that you play on your next turn, which is very stupid. I mean, this probably isn't better than an Ascendant Pack Leader, but, like, it trades with Ascendant Pack Leader, and you can always just play multiple 1-drops in your wolves deck, or your mono-green deck, or whatever. But Tenacious P isn't my favorite 1-drop from the set. That honor goes to our number 10, a card that I've actually played with a lot, because I freaking love this card, but I couldn't in good conscience put it below number 10. It's Cursebound Witch. Is this card good? Actually, yeah. I was going to say, I don't know, but no, this card is actually pretty good. Like, when compared to Eye Twitch, Shambling Ghast, I mean, Ghast is probably the best of those, but I think this is right there with Eye Twitch, right? Like, oftentimes, it's going to get you a better card than a lesson. Like, first of all, you can assemble Cat Oven with this card. Like, its spellbook contains both Cauldron Familiar and Witch's Oven. And by the way, just getting a Witch's Oven sometimes is amazing. I kind of missed that card. It does so many cool things, right? But aside from that, you can even get like Cruel Reality from this thing's spellbook. And often, I've been playing this card in decks that have like treasures, Skullport Merchant, Shambling Ghast, leave a treasure behind. So like, I can actually pay the 7 mana for a Cruel Reality really easily. There's this really sweet card that again is like at least on par with Eye Twitch. It makes it a good card. I've been playing these decks that have like 4 Eye Twitch, 4 Cursebound Witch, 4 Shambling Ghast, 4 Deadly Dispute, and then just some top end. It's been working out like a lot. So I'm a huge fan of this. I like spellbooks in general, and there's a lot of really cool spellbook cards that are cute too, like the Chef is cute. The Fisherman, Tireless Angler, he's cute, but this goes beyond cute. It's just like really decent on rate. It's not the worst body in the world, and there's plenty of ways to sacrifice it or like not care when it dies, chump block it, whatever. Chump block with it. And then suddenly you've got like a pretty decent Magic card in your hand. So like, I've been really enjoying Cursebound Witch, and I swear if I could make it number 1, I would. But there's Better cards than this, I think. All I'm saying is keep your eyes on this card, because for once, the CW is worth watching. Waka waka. But anyway, number 9 is Angel of Unity. Is this not a stacked Magic card, you guys? I mean, 2 mana for a 1/3 flying lifelink is already a good deal, but the Angels deck needed another 2-drop. It's really good in the Clerics deck, because it doesn't have to be in like a party deck. It can just be in a deck that is Clerics, or Clerics and like 1 or 2 other creature types, right? Like, you don't have to have this massive party theme. You can just have all your creatures be 1 or 2 of the party types, and suddenly this card gets incredible. I mean, I called it a 2 mana 1/3 flying lifelink, but it effectively creates 2 power worth of stats for the 2 mana, so it's even better than you think. And when you get it multiples, or when you blink it, I've seen a lot of people doing that with like teleportation circle and stuff. A lot of teleportation circle tricks in Alchemy. That's fun. But anyway, when you blink this, or you have multiples or whatever, you often end up making the same copy of a creature in your hand eventually enormous, right? Like, you'll just play Righteous Valkyrie. That's like a 4/6 or a 5/7 or something like that. Pretty consistently off the back of this card or multiple copies of it. It's got the right name because it really does bring a whole bunch of decks together, whether it's like Angels Splash Clerics or just Clerics or Party, Bant Party for that matter. Just a lot in Alchemy for this card to do, and this is one of those cards I'm kind of most jealous isn't in actual Standard. But there's another 2-drop flyer that I've been at least equally impressed by, and that's Fearsome Whelp. And whenever I see this card come down on turn 2, I do get a little fearful of what's going to happen later on in the game. I mean, people can play this on 2 into a Moonveil Regent or Maniform Hellkite on 3, which you need to know is very good. You can even just play a card that we'll see a little bit later on in the list, so I don't want to spoil it just yet. But, there's turn 4 Goldspan Dragons and early Inferno with the Star Mounts. I've been seeing that a lot, where like turn 2 this, turn 3 this, turn 4 Inferno with the Star Mounts. Pretty common play line in this format so far. So this, more so than a card like Orb of Dragonkind, for instance. And you can just play this with Orb of Dragonkind if you're looking for a lot of 2-drops for your Dragons decks. This has just made multiple Dragons decks way more playable, and I like that in Alchemy we don't just see the blue-red Dragons decks so often. You see it every now and again, but I've seen Boros Dragons, Grixis Dragons, red-black Dragons, I've seen just about every Dragons deck that you can imagine, and this card has been a huge part of it, and they always seem to have it on turn 2, don't they? But sticking with the uncommon theme here, we're going to look at number 7, which is Settle the Wilds, and honestly, I am very hesitant to put this card above the last few cards that we've talked about, but the more I play with this card, the more I'm convinced that it's like kind of a sleeper in this set, like one of the better cards that people just aren't really talking about. I mean, the double green is a bit of a consideration. It doesn't often go in these like Omnath decks that a lot of people are playing right now, because double green is a real requirement, and sometimes if you are playing multiple colors, it won't actually fix your mana. It just goes and gets like a 3rd green, which is kind of not great. But ramp that draws a card is very good, especially when it's drawing you a card that, A, you can definitely play on the next turn. Guaranteed. Because you have enough lands, right? It's just, by definition, you have the lands to play the card. But also it can go and get, 5, 6, 7 drops some of the time, depending on how many lands you have. The problem with the card is that there are going to be times, and I've already run into this, where late in the game, where you have 10 lands out, right? You draw this card, and it just goes and gets another land for 3 mana. And doesn't actually draw you a card because you're not playing any cards that have 10 mana value, right? But those times are few and far between, and very often on turn 3, when it goes and gets a land and you go and you seek a 4-drop, that's great. Like, it's really, really good. So just ramp that draws a card has been, I guess not surprisingly, kind of great so far. I mean, there are better cards in the set, but I'll settle for this because it is pretty wild. Why do I still do puns? That one couldn't have made anyone laugh, like in the entire audience. There's no way. But anyway, we'll move on to where are we? We'll look at my notebook. That's unprofessional. Number 6 is Kindred Denial. I'm convinced that this is just about the dumbest counterspell ever printed. Now, we did get, Absorb something. The 3-mana counterspell that is basically a mana drain, but that's another, that's another card that I feel like has been talked about over and over and over. Everyone's super hyped about, and not many people have talked about Kindred Denial. This card is dumb. I mean, it's kind of just like what I talked about a second ago, A ramp spell for 3 mana that draws you a card is good. A counterspell, even at 4 mana, that guaranteed draws you a card that's non-land, by the way, also great. Like, also really, really good. And unlike the last card, very often this will go and get you something, right? Like, you're probably not going to be in a situation where you counter, I don't know, an 8-drop. You can't go get an 8-drop, you know? It's probably not going to happen too often. But there are times where you say, you know, counter an opponent's Leer or something, and then you just go and get your own Leer. That happens all too often. So, like, because that's the only 5-drop you're playing in a lot of these decks, right? Or you counter a 4-drop, you either go get another Kindred Denial, or you get like a 4-drop Memory Deluge, right? A 4-drop card draw piece, which is also what you want in these control decks. So even though 4 mana is pretty steep for a counterspell, we can all agree. Counterspell, draw a card, a non-land, like draw gas, great. Like, it's just been really sick so far. Now, the number 5 slot was actually like the hardest slot in the whole video to put together. It really was. I had a lot of stuff that I wanted to mention in this slot, and I'm sure that a lot of you will bring those cards up in the comment section. There's a ton that could fit right here, but I think I'm going to use this slot to advocate for Divine Purge. Now, a lot of people have not given this card enough credit, right? Like Croaky's famously called this card garbage and stuff. And a lot of his reasons for not liking the card, I don't think have really borne out so far, right? Like, you need a really fast clock in your control deck for this to be a decent card. And that has honestly just not been true. You need, you can Doomscar on turn 3 anyway. Well, now you basically guaranteed have a sweeper on turn 3, whether it's Doomscar after a Foretell or it's this. You can play like 8 copies of a 3-mana sweeper in your blue-white deck or whatever. So you basically just always have a sweeper on 3 with Divine Purge. And even though it's just like a mega elite spellbinder for the things that are already on the table, like, it's still really decent a lot of the time, and it exiles the things so they don't get like dies triggers off of them or anything, which is just matters like so much all the time. So Divine Purge often buys you the amount of time that you need to like draw the counter spells that you need. You couldn't counter the creatures the first time they hit the battlefield because you're on the draw and they're playing 2-drops, and you can't counter that. But now after you've Divine Purged, they've waited a couple of turns to get the mana to play the creatures again and all that. Like, now you can counter them, right? Or now you actually have the breathing room to get to the real sweeper, like the turn 5 Doomscar that you didn't have at the beginning of the game, right? So, you have breathing room to cast your card draw spell. Like, actually leave mana open, not counter spells, Memory Deluge on the next turn while your opponent is still rebuilding, but they can't kill you, right? So it just makes your opponent's board state like way less threatening for a couple of turns. And just those like 2-3 turns while they're redeploying their guys, they can't deploy any new guys, or if they do deploy new guys, they can't redeploy the old guys that are in exile, right? So it just trips them up. Really a huge speed bump this card becomes. And honestly, like, cards like Luminarch Aspirant are pretty good at 2 mana. They're nowhere near as good at 4 mana. And, even if your opponent had 2 2-drops out, it's going to cost them 8 mana to redeploy those 2 2-drops, right? So, like, Divine Purge has been super sweet at buying time, and buying time is very important in control decks, both in Standard and Alchemy, right? So this is another one of those cards I'm really jealous we don't have for Standard, because, like, this could work. We could have this in Standard. Why not? But one way or the other, the card has been way more powerful than I initially thought it was going to be. But number 4 is a card that you've probably heard of this one too. Honestly, this one has seen a fair amount of hype in the early days of the format. A lot of content creators messing around with it. But I still felt like the fun level was there enough. And the competitive level is honestly not as high as some of the cards I mentioned at the very beginning of the video. But I still think that it's worth bringing up Key to the Archive, even though pretty much everybody else on YouTube.com and Twitch.tv has already brought this card up, right? You've seen people experiment and do some wild stuff with this. I mean, the spell book for this thing includes like Approach of the Second Sun and Day of Judgment or Wrath of God, one of the two. Plus like literally some of the most powerful cards in the history of Magic. You can get a Time Warp, a Demonic Tutor, a Regrowth, a Counterspell. Like, there's all kinds of nasty stuff in this card's spell book, and it creates mana at the same time. And did I mention that this is an artifact? And guess what can blink artifacts? Teleportation circle. So like every turn, you get to draft a new card from this thing's spellbook and helps you cast it by tapping for mana. Ramping from 4 to 6, very often 7 on the next turn, is stupid for a lot of reasons. You can cast an Alrund's Epiphany off of that mana. You can cast the stupid Day of Judgment, not Day of Judgment, whatever the 7 mana is, like Faithbound Judge and Sinner's Judgment or whatever it is. The new approach of the Second Sun, like win condition for blue-white decks. You can cast that really early out of your yard with a Key to the Archive. So there's just all kinds of like hilarious, fun stuff this thing does. It's not fun for everybody, but it's fun for you when you're doing it. So if you haven't tried out Teleportation Circle plus Key to the Archive yet, you owe it to yourself to do that. Number 3 is Lupine Harbingers. Good lord, this card is a freaking house, man. Like, this card, just look at it. On the surface, it's a 4 mana, easy to cast too. Like splashable, just 1 green mana. Easy to cast, 4 mana, trample, haste, 4/4. Like, it's not bad. Like, it's kind of like better than Ulvenwald Oddity in a lot of ways. Just on its own, and you get to cast multiple copies of Ulvenwald Oddity now in your mono green deck if you want it. But I've seen this in everything from mono green to like Bant control, right? It's played a lot of different roles. In the Bant control deck, it's like a finisher. Because your opponent will just leave it foretold for like the entire game and just like Doomscar, Solid Coming, Doomscar, and just like control the game for literally 13 turns until they just cast Lupine Harbingers and kill you in one shot with this card. Because it can do that, but also in like mono green, it's a fine card too. Sometimes they don't have anything better to do on turn 2, or maybe they have a better 4-drop, a Seeketh's Chariot or something like that. Then on turn 3, you'll see this foretold. And then late into the game, after you've cast your 2 sweepers, blown out mono green as much as you can, they still have this in their back pocket. They throw it on the table, hit for 8, win the game, or like they throw it on the table, it's an 8/8. They have an unnatural growth that boosted to a 16/16, win the game. Like, there's a lot of fun lines with Lupine Harbingers, and it's also a wolf. So it shows up in these werewolves decks where like you can't play Ulvenwald Oddity in those decks. I mean, you could, but it's not a wolf. This is. And so just a slick 4-drop wolf for those decks too. It's just a lot. Again, like some of the other cards on this list, this just kind of goes everywhere and does all kinds of cool stuff. So I've really been impressed with this card, even though it's been played against me way more than I've played with it. We are at number 2 already. Like, how did that happen, man? Number 2 is Town Razor Tyrant. Now, this is another 3-drop play that you can play alongside the 2-drop dragon, Fearsome Whelp. And this always feels really good to drop on turn 3. It almost feels like a Stone Rain. I feel vindicated. I told my friends in 1996 that Psychic Venom was a good Magic card. Even though this is like a million times better than Psychic Venom. A lot of people, myself included, have called this just a better Avalanche Riders. And it kind of is. It kind of is in a lot of ways. I mean, it doesn't have the Echo. It's a 4/4. It has an evasive ability. It may not have haste like Avalanche Riders did, but it still kind of feels really reminiscent of that card. And in some ways, just a better version. It doesn't outright destroy the land, but you'd be surprised how big of a condition, how many opponents it'll make sweat, right? Because like, the turn after you play this, they have to take 2 damage if they want to keep their land. And then you swing in for 4 damage. And then you say go, and they take another 2 damage, and this stupid thing has done 8 damage to them in just like 1 turn cycle, right? So 1.5 turn cycles. So this card has just been dumb lately. Whether you play it on turn 3 or you play it on turn 4 naturally, like you're supposed to, it's still a fine Magic card, you know? Even if your opponent deals with your 4/4 flying body, they still have to contend with a shock every turn for the rest of the game until they no longer need that land. So this has just been kind of part of the reason I think this card is Arena only, or Alchemy only, digital only, whatever you want to say, is because it's kind of too good. It's just kind of too good of a Magic card to print into paper standard. I mean, this has really lifted not only the Dragons decks, but just like mid-range decks in general that get this on turn 3 off of a Prosperous Innkeeper or whatever. It's been a sick card so far, and it's going to continue to be a sick card. Because I'm TRT Dynamite. Number 1, easily. And we've already talked about some like really not only cool and fun cards, but like super powerful cards in this video. But there is a giant gap between just about any card I've talked about and this card, because I feel like this is a strong card. This is a card that helps out, again, multiple decks, but creates a whole new genre of deck that I really, really wish we had in Standard. This is probably, number 1 here, I won't even say probably. This is definitely the card that I'm most raw about not getting in Standard. And honestly, it's one of the cards in Alchemy that you could most print into Standard with no real problems. But number one is Sanguine Brushstroke. I wanted Blood Artist so much in Crimson Vow, guys. I made that pretty well known. I said it how many times? Like 5,000, something like that. But we didn't get Blood Artist because Wizards are cowards. Instead, we got what is in most ways a better Blood Artist in Alchemy. So damn you, Alchemy. But while we have the option to play the card, I'm going to play the card. We can finally play Aristocrats. And not only do we get Blood Artist in Standard, but we also get a second way of just doing Blood Artist things. Like, not only do we get the ping, really the drain whenever one of our dudes dies, or whenever any dude dies, but we also get pings whenever we sacrifice blood tokens. So that's double the pings, and there's plenty of awesome, like, good playable cards that create blood tokens. I mean, you play Voldaren Epicure, which is something that does a damage to the opponent and is a really good sack token, or sack target, Aristocrats target or whatever, but also creates a blood token so that you can, sack it and ping them with that, right? So not only that, but there's a ton of other, like, incredible cards for the, Voldaren Bloodcaster, for instance. There's a ton of incredible cards for this deck that form a kind of vampire aristocrats deck, which is originally what aristocrats was, so makes sense to me. I've just been having all the fun in the world playing Blood Artist in Standard again. And again, it's not a strictly better Blood Artist, but it feels like a better Blood Artist because it gives you two different axes on which to deal damage to your opponent and gain life back and all that. It's just, I'm really, really raw that this card isn't in Standard, but at the same time, that doesn't stop me from having all the fun I ever wanted to have in Alchemy. And I'm a little mad about that because I see your game, Wizards. I see your game. Isn't this fun? Don't you want to just do this forever? And yes, Wizards, but I'm not going to. Just call me Slob Ross over here. That's what I am. But anyway, that's my top 10 cards for Alchemy so far, at least, just what I've been playing. And I know, again, that I left a ton of stupid, super powerful cards off of this list, but a lot of those cards are cards that you've heard of over and over. Everyone's told you they're good. You don't need me to tell you they're good. However, that said, let me know anything that would be on your list that wasn't on mine down there in the comments section. Or just let me know how you felt about this list and what cards on the list you've been playing around with, if you like them or not. It's a fun conversation to have. I do read the comments, so get down there and sound off. But aside from that, if you enjoyed the content, like the content, subscribe, do all the stuff. We're trying to get to 5 million subs. We're at 124K now, so we got a way to go, but just help us get there. Aside from that, do all the other YouTube stuff. You watch my stuff. I'll leave some stuff down there for you to watch in the description box, along with links to the Patreon if you want to support the channel. It's just $1 a month. You get to vote on what content we do. Right now, there's a pretty hotly contested Patreon poll going on, so get in there. It's just $1 a month, and if you want to see me play some Magic, you can do that on the twitch.tv website. But anyway, that's all I've got for now. Just let me know how you felt about all this, and don't worry, last Alchemy video for a while. Can I promise that to you and you'll be okay with it? Can I? Anyway. Love you guys. I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.